The first thing everyone noticed was how still the room became. Not quiet, still. Like the moment before an earthquake when everything holds its breath. Cameras were already live when Jasmine Crockett and Ibrahim Traoré walked side by side into the oversized hearing chamber. You could almost see the staffers in the back exchanging nervous glances. No one knew exactly what would happen, only that this wasn't going to be business as usual. The headlines had been screaming for days: the African firebrand meets the American disruptor. Some called it a stunt. Some called it an alliance. No one could agree. But no one could look away, either. Jasmine's expression was unreadable as she set her folder on the polished oak table. Traoré didn't carry notes. He just leaned forward, hands clasped, eyes steady, like he'd already decided there was nothing here that could shake him. A junior congressman tried to start with a scripted welcome, but his voice cracked halfway through. The microphones picked it up. Some on the committee smiled politely, pretending not to notice. But everyone felt it. That tension, tight, electric, almost alive. And then the chairwoman gave the floor to Jasmine first. She didn't stand. Didn't clear her throat. She just spoke, voice low but hard enough to cut glass. I came here today because we keep pretending the system works, she began. We keep pretending it matters which party writes the bills when the outcome stays the same. People are still dying broke. Kids are still breathing mold. Communities are still treated like they're disposable. A hush fell over the rows of cameras and reporters. She turned her gaze on Traoré. And I'm sure President Traoré knows exactly what I'm talking about. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Traoré lifted his chin slightly. His reply came in French-accented English, measured but sharp. Indeed. Where I come from, we call it neocolonialism. Here, you call it politics. A ripple of surprise broke across the room. A few journalists actually gasped. Traoré went on, voice deep and unhurried. But let us not pretend we are the same, Congresswoman. I came here to say what too many are afraid to say: America profits from the suffering it claims to pity. Someone's pen slipped off their notepad and clattered to the floor. Jasmine didn't flinch. She just locked eyes with him. And what would you have us do? Burn it all down? Traoré leaned closer, so their faces were level, so the microphones picked up every syllable. If that is what it takes to stop the hypocrisy. The chairwoman tried to interject: Gentlemen, Congresswoman, we can return to decorum. But neither of them looked away. In that instant, it didn't matter whose side you were on. Whether you loved them or feared them, everyone watching knew the same thing. Something irreversible had just begun. The news alerts hit every phone in the building within 60 seconds. Traoré challenges you. Hypocrisy. Crockett fires back. Live feeds were flooding social media before the chairwoman even regained her composure. In the back row, a seasoned reporter whispered to her colleague, "This isn't a hearing anymore. This is a reckoning." Jasmine finally stood. Her movements were deliberate, calm in a way that made the moment even more combustible. "You talk about hypocrisy," she said, her voice carrying clear across the chamber, "but you're sitting here because you know America still has the power to shape what happens in your country." Traoré didn't blink. "And you're sitting here because you know America refuses to change unless someone forces its hand." A low murmur swept through the room, audible, raw. Aides scribbled frantic notes. Some committee members shifted uncomfortably, as if they'd just realized this exchange was going to be replayed on every network in prime time. Jasmine stepped around the table, closing the space between them. The camera zoomed in, catching the flicker of fire in her eyes. "People in my district don't have the luxury of waiting for perfect revolutions," she said. "They need policies that put roofs over their heads and food on their tables. You can call that incremental if you want. I call it survival." Traoré's gaze didn't soften. "And what has all your survival bought you?" Another generation with nothing but promises? A hush fell so heavy it pressed against everyone's ribs. Jasmine's jaw tensed. We don't get to walk away. We don't get to call it quits because the system is ugly. We stay. We fight. And we keep fighting until it becomes something better. Traoré shook his head, slowly, almost sorrowfully. Or until it consumes you, he said. Someone near the back let out a ragged exhale. The chairwoman tried again to take back control, her gavel tapping the table with a hollow sound that nobody obeyed. Traoré turned to the panel of congressmen and women who'd been silent, waiting for their moment to grandstand. You call yourselves leaders, he said, his tone suddenly rising, but you hide behind procedure while your people suffer. You think the rest of the world doesn't see it? You think we don't notice your selective outrage? The congressman shifted, uncomfortable. Jasmine looked over her shoulder at them, her voice cutting through their embarrassment. He's right about that, she said. He's right about a lot of it. But don't think for a second I'll let you stand here and pretend you care more than we do. She turned fully to face Traoré again. You want to challenge this country's conscience? Fine. But don't pretend you're the only one willing to risk something. A flashbulb went off. Reporters leaned so far forward it looked like they'd tip out of their chairs. Traoré studied her, unblinking. Then let us risk it together, he said. And for the first time all morning, neither of them looked like they were going to back down. For a moment, it felt like the hearing might collapse under its own weight. The chairwoman's voice was a brittle whisper as she called for a recess no one respected. The cameras were still rolling. The microphones were still live. And Jasmine wasn't done. She stepped closer to Traoré, her tone lower but no less fierce. You want the world to believe that America's sickness is unique. That only here do the powerful hoard everything. But let's be honest, your country has its own billionaires who would rather see children starve than share. Traoré didn't flinch. That is true, he said quietly. But at least we are honest about our corruption. Here, you call it capitalism. A staffer in the corner gasped audibly. Another reporter buried his face in his hands. The live comments were exploding. Did he just say that? This is insane. Jasmine's eyes narrowed. Don't mistake my criticism for resignation. I'm not here to defend America's sins. But I won't let you come into this chamber and pretend you've never benefited from the same systems you condemn. Traoré's jaw worked, but he didn't interrupt. You sit here on American soil, she continued, her voice gathering force, because your people are still forced to negotiate with our banks, our corporations, our military aid. You think I don't see the leverage you're using? The same leverage that kept my grandparents in segregated schools and keeps families in my district underpaid and unseen? Her hand came down flat on the table, the sound echoing like a crack of thunder. And you think I'm going to let you shame me for trying to fix it from inside? No one spoke. No one dared. Traoré's reply was so quiet it almost got lost under the camera's whirring. I don't shame you, he said. I pity you. Jasmine froze. For the first time, something flickered in her eyes that wasn't just anger. It was hurt. Traoré exhaled slowly. Because you are the only one here brave enough to speak truth, and you are still chained to the illusion that this machine can be redeemed. The entire hearing room seemed to tilt. Jasmine's voice broke the silence, rough around the edges. Better to believe in something than believe in nothing, she said. Traoré stepped closer, so close the microphones caught the scrape of his shoes against the marble. Then let us believe in the people, he said. Not the flags. Not the institutions. Just the people. Another flash went off. Aides were openly crying now. Some were texting furiously. Jasmine stared him down, her throat working as she swallowed. Fine, she said. But you'd better be ready to prove you mean it. A single phrase, and you could feel the shift, the knowledge that whatever this was, it had outgrown the hearing room. The cameras followed every move as Jasmine and Traoré stepped away from the witness table, the heat between them so fierce it seemed to radiate through the air. No one dared to speak over them, not the committee members, not the aides, not even the reporters who'd been dying for a chance to break in. In the front row, a journalist whispered to her colleague, "Do you see this? They're not even arguing anymore. They're negotiating." It was true. Something in the tension had shifted. No longer a contest of who could wound the other deeper, it was becoming something harder to define. Jasmine folded her arms, her chin tilted up. "If you think I'm going to stand here while you paint me as a pawn for this country's failures, you're wrong. I'm here because I believe we can still make this system accountable. That doesn't make me naive, it makes me relentless." Traoré nodded slowly. "And I respect that. But you must understand, my people cannot wait for America to grow a conscience. They are dying now." A flicker of recognition crossed Jasmine's face. She glanced around the room, at the American flags hanging heavy on the walls, at the stern portraits of lawmakers past, all of them white men in suits. "I know," she admitted, voice low. "And that's why I won't pretend our solutions are perfect. But I also won't pretend your revolution stops at your borders. You want to dismantle exploitation? Then let's talk about how it thrives everywhere." Traoré studied her, expression unreadable. "You and I," he said finally, "are two sides of the same wound." A shiver passed through the chamber. No one was sure whether to be inspired or terrified. Jasmine stepped in closer, her words as sharp as they were sincere. "Then maybe it's time to stop pretending either of us has all the answers." Traoré's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Agreed." The chairwoman looked like she might faint from relief. If you're both willing," she stammered, "perhaps we can reconvene after a recess to collect ourselves." But Jasmine didn't take her eyes off Traoré. "I'm not here to make you comfortable," she said. "I'm here to make you confront the fact that your struggle and mine aren't separate. And if you can't see that, you're no different from the people you claim to fight." Traoré's stare didn't waver. "And if you can't admit this system was never built to save you," he replied, "you will die defending your own oppressor." A stunned hush fell, the kind that isn't quiet at all but vibrates with too many unsaid things. Somewhere in the back, a young intern mouthed, "Oh my God." This was no longer a hearing. It was an unmasking, of countries, of convictions, of the delusions that keep injustice alive. And everyone watching knew the same thing. They were witnessing history. The air had become so dense that even the cameras seemed to struggle to focus. Every angle caught the same truth: neither Jasmine nor Traoré was going to surrender first. The chairwoman tried once more to restore order. Let's adjourn for a recess," she began, her voice thin. Jasmine didn't move. She leaned her palms flat on the table and spoke directly into the microphone. "You know what the difference is between you and me?" she asked Traoré. He waited. "You can walk away from this chamber and say you never believed in it," she continued. "You can call it all corruption and decay. And maybe you're right. But I don't have that luxury. My people live and die by what happens in these rooms." Traoré's face shifted, just a flicker, but enough for the cameras to catch it. "Then what do you call it when you know something is poisoned and you keep drinking?" he asked softly. Jasmine's jaw tightened. "I call it survival." The word seemed to echo in the high ceiling like a warning. She straightened, lifting her chin. "And if you think you're the only one who's sacrificed, think again. I've lost colleagues to despair. I've seen kids in my district go to sleep hungry while billionaires rewrite tax laws behind closed doors. So don't you dare pity me." Traoré didn't flinch. "I don't pity you," he said. "I fear for you." Reporters could hardly type fast enough. Crockett and Traoré, the clash that broke Washington. Jasmine stepped around the table, closing the gap between them until they were just inches apart. "You think you have nothing left to lose," she said quietly. "That's why you talk like this. But some of us still have people counting on us to try." Traoré's expression turned solemn. "And I respect that. But one day you will understand, systems do not crumble because you ask nicely. They crumble when you refuse to play your part." A crackle of static burst over the loudspeaker as the chairwoman fumbled for the microphone again. "I am officially calling a recess." But Jasmine didn't move. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice ringing through the chamber. "I will never stop demanding better for the people I represent. But I will not let you or anyone else pretend that burning everything down is the only path to justice." Traoré studied her. For the first time, something almost like respect glimmered in his eyes. "Then perhaps," he said, "we are not enemies after all." A hush fell over the crowd, thousands of people glued to their screens, holding their breath. Jasmine gave a single nod, her gaze unwavering. "Maybe not," she replied. "But don't mistake that for agreement." As the room erupted in a tangle of shouting, camera flashes, and frantic commentary, one truth settled over everyone watching. This wasn't just a debate. It was a collision, of worldviews, of conviction, of what it means to fight for change. And no matter whose side you were on, you couldn't look away. Security had gathered along the walls, though no one dared intervene. The tension wasn't the kind you could disperse with polite applause or a gavel tap. It was the kind that made you question whose side you were on. Jasmine slowly stepped back, but her eyes never left Traoré's. "Tell me something," she said, her voice lower now, almost intimate. "When you stand in front of your people and call for revolution, do you ever think about the ones who won't survive it?" Traoré didn't answer right away. His gaze was so steady it bordered on unsettling. "I do," he said finally. "Every time." A young congressional aide at the edge of the room swallowed hard. The whole country was watching this exchange, no teleprompters, no rehearsed sound bites, just two leaders stripping each other down to their rawest beliefs. "And you still think," Jasmine pressed, "that tearing down the institutions is worth that price?" Traoré tilted his head. "Is it better to let them rot and pretend they are still sacred?" That question landed like a blow to the ribs. You could see it in Jasmine's expression, a flicker of pain she couldn't quite hide. She exhaled slowly. "I'm not here because I believe the system is holy," she said. "I'm here because it's the only weapon I have left that doesn't require blood." Traoré nodded once, acknowledging the truth in her words. "You are braver than most," he said. "But bravery inside a cage is still captivity." Another murmur rippled through the chamber. Even the most jaded journalists were riveted. "You think you're free because you stand outside it?" Jasmine asked, her tone sharpening. "You think you're immune to compromise? You're here negotiating for aid, for alliances, don't act like your hands are clean." Traoré didn't flinch. "No one's hands are clean," he said. "But some of us stopped pretending they could be." They stood there, neither willing to yield the final word. The chairwoman looked ready to cry. We will adjourn and reconvene." "Not yet," Jasmine cut in, her voice slicing through the din. "I have one more thing to say." She turned to face the cameras, her face calm but resolute. "To the people watching," she said, "you should understand this moment isn't about me or him. It's about whether you will keep letting these systems pit us against each other while they stay rich, stay safe, stay above consequence." Traoré stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with her now, though they hadn't agreed on a thing. "And it is about whether you will remember," he added quietly, "that no empire falls without the people's consent." A stunned hush fell. It wasn't a truce, but it wasn't war either. Somewhere in the country, thousands of viewers sat frozen, realizing this wasn't the ending they'd expected. It was the beginning of something neither side could control. The recess was supposed to be a chance to defuse the moment, to give everyone a break from the electricity crackling across the chamber. But no one moved. Even the stenographers looked like they'd forgotten how to breathe. Traoré glanced over at Jasmine, his voice dropping to something only she could hear. "You know they'll twist this," he murmured. "They'll turn it into a headline that suits them." "I know," Jasmine replied without hesitation. "And I don't care." At that, Traoré actually smiled, just a flicker, gone in an instant. "You really are dangerous," he said. Jasmine straightened her blazer, never breaking eye contact. "And you're really predictable." That drew a low gasp from a cluster of reporters. Even in their most tense disagreement, there was a strange, grudging respect between them. Finally, the chairwoman managed to find her voice. If there are no further statements, we will break." "I'm not finished," Jasmine interrupted, her tone smooth as a blade. She turned back to the microphone, her eyes finding the camera lens like she was looking through it and straight into living rooms across America. "I came here today to testify about funding and policy," she said. "But that's not why any of you are watching." Her voice never wavered. "You're watching because this is the first time you've seen two people who disagree on almost everything still agree on one truth: the system as it is, does not care whether you live or die." A hush so total fell that even the camera operators forgot to adjust their zoom. Traoré didn't contradict her. He didn't need to. The silence was answer enough. "And if you think sitting on the sidelines is going to protect you," Jasmine continued, her voice rising just a fraction, "if you think pretending neutrality is noble, you're already part of the problem." She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Because in that moment, she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for every person who'd been told they had to pick a side between two broken visions of the future. Traoré's expression turned solemn. "You know," he said quietly, "for all your faith in these halls, I have never heard anyone here speak that plainly." "That's because you haven't been listening," Jasmine replied. It wasn't a rebuke. It was a simple truth. Somewhere in the back, a young staffer wiped a tear from her cheek, unsure why it had fallen. In that second, you could feel the walls between ideologies cracking, just a hairline fracture, but enough to let the light in. And millions of people watching knew it too. This wasn't just spectacle. It was the first real conversation they'd seen in years. A low buzz started from the hallway, reporters whispering into live feeds, their voices hushed but urgent. "This is not a hearing anymore. This is history." Inside, Jasmine and Traoré still stood shoulder to shoulder, though neither pretended to be allies. The chairwoman tried once more to salvage protocol. We will now recess." "No," Jasmine said, so calmly it was almost tender. "We won't." Traoré didn't interrupt. He folded his arms and waited, watching her like someone who was finally seeing a worthy adversary. Jasmine's gaze swept across the room, stopping at every polished face that had spent years trading favors, signing off on budgets that starved entire communities. "You think this ends when the cameras go off," she said, her tone deceptively soft. "You think you can wrap it in press releases and platitudes." She shook her head slowly. "But every person watching knows better. They've lived better. They understand that when you have to choose between rent and insulin, you stop caring who's polite." Traoré's jaw tightened, just slightly, as if her words had cut deeper than he expected. "And you," she added, finally turning to face him again, "you believe the answer is fire? That we burn it all down?" She paused. "I don't dismiss that instinct. I respect it. Because I have felt it too." A shiver passed through the room, the kind that says this is the part no one will forget. "But here's the truth," Jasmine continued. "It's easier to torch something than to rebuild it. And no matter how righteous your anger, someone always gets buried in the rubble." Traoré met her stare without blinking. "Then you'd rather let the rot keep spreading?" "No," she said, voice steady as steel. I'd rather carve it out piece by piece so no one else has to die for our failures. The chairwoman's gavel clacked helplessly against the desk. Order. Order. Jasmine echoed, not turning. You want order? Then start telling the truth. The chamber fell silent again, but this time it wasn't fragile, it was electric. Because every person listening knew she was right. Traoré slowly unfolded his arms. One day, he said quietly, you'll realize you can't carve out corruption with compromise. And one day, Jasmine shot back, you'll realize you can't lead people if all you ever teach them is to destroy. For a moment, the air between them felt alive, like something ancient and enormous had decided to make itself visible. And in living rooms and break rooms and bus stops across America, people were leaning in, heartbeats drumming in their ears, wondering the same question. Which one of them was right? The cameras kept rolling. The world kept watching. And neither of them looked away. Outside the chamber, the clip was already going viral. Millions were watching not because they were told to, but because something about this felt different. Not rehearsed. Not spin. Just raw truth and a collision no one could stop. Inside, Jasmine finally stepped back from the microphone. For the first time since she'd entered, her hands were shaking. But she didn't hide them. Traoré saw it and didn't smirk or sneer. He nodded once. Respect, even if he'd never say it out loud. You think you're the only one carrying that weight? He asked, his voice quiet enough that only the first few rows heard. Jasmine swallowed. No, she said. But I'm the only one here who'll admit it. Another shiver of recognition moved through the room. That was why people believed her. Because she didn't pretend to be unbreakable. She didn't pretend her convictions hadn't cost her everything. A staffer stepped forward, holding out a folder, an attempt to steer the conversation back to safer ground. Jasmine didn't take it. This isn't about funding lines or amendments, she said, lifting her chin. It's about whether you still believe any of this is worth fighting for. Traoré studied her, the same way you study a battlefield before deciding whether to advance. You know, he said, finally letting his exhaustion show, I came here to make you look weak. And you failed, Jasmine replied without gloating. Just stating a fact. He smiled, a tired, grudging curve of his mouth. No. I failed because you made me remember why I started fighting in the first place. It was the closest thing to a truce either of them would ever offer. The chairwoman dabbed her eyes with a tissue she pretended was for allergies. This hearing is adjourned, she whispered. No one moved. Because even though the microphones had been silenced, the echo of that final exchange was still filling the chamber, pouring through the walls, bleeding into every corner of the country. It was in the way Jasmine didn't drop her gaze. It was in the way Traoré didn't look away. It was in the way every viewer realized this wasn't a debate. It was a reckoning. As the two of them stepped away from the table, a reporter called out, voice shaking. Congresswoman, President Traoré, if you could say one thing to the American people watching, what would it be? Jasmine didn't hesitate. Stop waiting for permission. Traoré's reply came just as fast. Stop believing the lies that keep you divided. And then, side by side but not quite together, they walked out of the chamber, leaving behind the single most honest conversation Washington had seen in decades. Thank you for being here to witness this. If this story resonated with you, if it challenged you, inspired you, or made you rethink what's possible, don't let it end when the video stops. Share it. Talk about it. Because the real change starts when we stop pretending and start demanding better. This isn't just about politics, it's about refusing to be silenced. And together, we can make sure no one ever has to fight alone.